He backpedals in the shotgun, 3 wide. It's 1st and 10 for the Packers. First play.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is Sunday, January the 24th, 2021. It is currently 4:03 p.m. Central Time. And yes, that is the football game that's on. Yes, that's the Bucs versus the Packers. Right now, Tampa Bay is leading Green Bay 21-10 at the beginning of the third quarter. Yes, that is what I'm currently listening to. Now, I'm a little bit behind because I had it paused. But yes, I'm listening to the game. I'm sitting here at church. I have my iPad and I'm listening to the game via Sirius XM satellite radio and the app. And yeah, I've been listening to it. I've had it on pause. And I'm just sitting here going, that's kind of what I want to do. Look, I'm going to be honest with you. It's Sunday afternoon. And I want to listen. Actually, I want to be at home watching that football game. That's what I want to be doing right now. I'm just, look, no pretense, no, I'm not going to fake it. I'm not going to say it any differently. And I think that's key to being, I think that's what all Christians need to do. We have to be more honest sometimes with the reality, but that's the reality. And the reason I'm starting with, I had it paused just to play that for you. The reason I did that was to demonstrate something. That's really a large portion of what spiritual warfare is all about. Spiritual warfare is a constant struggle between you and yourself, between the desire to serve God, to focus on God, to put God first, to set your affections on things above, to love God with all your heart, mind, body, and soul. This spiritual perspective versus what the flesh wants, what you want. And sometimes it's not even a matter between what is godly and what is sinful. Sometimes it's just a battle between what is godly and what isn't necessarily beneficial. Now, there's nothing wrong with obviously watching a football game. There's nothing wrong with that. But there are times that something like that can get in the way of doing what we need to do for ourselves spiritually. And little by little, those other things that may not necessarily be sinful, they become sinful because they start becoming the driving force in our life. That's where our passion is. That's what we focus on. That's what we think about. That's what we talk about. That's what gets us excited. And at that point, it almost reaches the level of idolatry, which is a sinful thing and which is a sin problem. Sometimes we focus on, okay, I'm a Christian and I've got a battle against sin. That's spiritual warfare. I got a battle against sin. I got a battle against the devil. I got a battle against, spiritual forces. But it really sometimes spiritual warfare is just a battle between the spiritual side, focusing on the things of God, versus just fighting against ourself, fighting against giving self over. Yes, we obviously don't want to give ourselves over to sin, but just giving ourselves over to other things, just giving, how can I say, I think this is a fair way of saying it, giving our worship to other things, declaring other things to be worthy of our time, our attention, and our focus. Now, I know there has to be balance. So I'm not saying, get rid of everything and go join a monastery. I'm not saying that. I just want you to realize that sometimes when we talk about spiritual warfare, when we talk about fighting, sometimes we think of it in this dramatic idea, this dramatic scene of angels and demons and this huge fight. And sometimes the fight, though, takes on a more everyday appearance, like the thing that you don't even realize spiritual warfare is going on. Like right here, I'm at church. Do I turn on the microphone and teach and share and focus on the things of God, not just to teach you to do that, but do I turn on this microphone so that I can focus on the things of God, or do I just turn this microphone off and go back over here and hit play and listen to the football game? Right? I mean, it's middle of a Sunday afternoon. I don't technically need to be here. I don't technically need to be here. I did hours of live broadcasting this morning. If I wanted to, I could wait and come out here at 6 o'clock or 6:30 tonight. But I just felt that, you know what? It's Sunday. I need to go out there and I need to make the things of God the priority, even though I don't want it to be. And I'm just being honest with you. I don't want it to be, but that's the struggle. That's the fight. And sometimes it just shows up in something that appears so trivial. It's not like, okay, it's a battle between scripture and alcoholism. No, sometimes the battle is between focusing on God or a football game. Now, that doesn't mean you can't watch a football game. Not saying that in any way, shape, or form. I'm just saying sometimes fighting against something that you just want to do and maybe even sacrificing what you want to do to turn your focus to the things of God, I think is an essential element in spiritual warfare. Now, why am I saying all of that? Because once again, we're going to turn our attention back to that classic book, The Christian in Complete Armor. We're still in chapter 1, and we're going to come to, I think, a very important discussion. And I think some of the things I was just trying to illustrate to you, what I was trying to kind of explain to you, I think is going to be critical in what we're going to be looking at in the book. So now, if you don't have a copy of The Christian in Complete Armor, well, you can get a digital copy for very, very cheap. If you, the easiest way to find it is if you join the Theology Central Book Club. That's Theology Central. The Theology Central Book Club. It's part of Amazon. What you do, it's very simple. Go to theologycentral.net. That's our pod page, theologycentral.net. Go to the blog section. Go a couple of blog posts down. You'll see a blog post about the Theology Central Book Club. Open up that article, click the link, and it'll open up the Theology Central Book Club via Amazon on Amazon.com. And there you can just go through the suggested books. You'll see The Christian in Complete Armor. You click on it and you can buy a digital copy. Or you can, go from there and do a search for a physical copy if you want one. The Theology Central Book Club is absolutely free. We don't get any money for it. It's not some trick for you to support us. Nothing like that. It's just a way that when I'm talking about books or we're working through books, it's an easy way for people to see what books we're looking at. And whenever I come across a book that I think is interesting, I just throw it in the suggested list. And then I think you get an email telling you I've suggested a new book. So just an easy way to keep up with everything. So that's the Theology Central Book Club. So you can get a copy that way. But if you have a copy, it's time to open it up. Open it up to The Christian in Complete Armor, chapter 1. And let's just remind ourselves of really the key foundation verse for this entire book, The Christian in Complete Armor. It's Ephesians chapter 6, verse 10. Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Now, you remember the author of The Christian in Complete Armor, William Gurnall, he decided to kind of just skip over that phrase, my brethren, but we spent a lot of time discussing it. I thought it was an important conversation. Hopefully you thought as well. Last time we looked at the phrase, finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. That as a Christian, we need strength. We need courage to be prepared to fight this battle. And we talked a lot about how we have this strength and how we have this kind of courage. And we talked a lot about that. We talked a lot about that in the last time we were together. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a copy of the book really quick over here on my Kindle. And I'm just gonna back up a little bit and just read a couple of things here. It says, and I'm just gonna quickly do some review by just reading a couple of lines to get us to where we are today. Be strong, that is, be of good courage, so commonly used in Scripture. So be strong, be of good courage. This is the idea. And it says the Christian of all men needs courage and resolution. Right? That the Christian, since we have this spiritual war in front of us, we need this courage and we need resolution to be able to fight this. Now, if you remember, he talked a little about prayer. We talked about prayer as well. And then all of this led to this statement, all right? See some few pieces of service that every Christian engageth in. All right. So what he wants us to do, what William Gurnall wants to do here is he wants us to see why we need all of this courage, why we need prayer, why we need this strength is because of the service that every Christian is to engage in. These are some things that we are to be involved in. Every Christian, according to William Gurnall, should be engaged in the following things. We're going to look at the first one that he mentions. I don't know if we're going to get past this one, but we're going to look at least at the first one that he mentioned. So let's kind of put this all together. You as a Christian, you need strength. You need courage. And we find that strength and courage in God. We find it through prayer. And again, we could talk a lot about everything we discussed, but you can go back and listen. The reason we need this is because there are a few, as he says, some few pieces of service that every Christian engageth in. And the first service, as this translation refers to it as, this first thing that we are to be engaged in as a Christian is to, and I'm going to read it directly from the book. First, the Christian is to proclaim and prosecute an irreconcilable war against his bosom sins. You as a Christian, myself, all of us who claim to be Christians, we are to proclaim and prosecute an irreconcilable war against his bosom sins. Now, let's look up something really quick. Let's look up this idea of bosom. All right, let's just, so that we get used, when they use a word, we want to know exactly what they are referring to here. I could have just looked it up on my Kindle. I didn't think of it. Give me 1 second. That's not the right word. Okay. I hate when it tries to tell you what word you want. You're like, no, I know what word I want. Okay. It says it has a couple of definitions. The one that would be applicable to this is of a friend, close or intimate. The two girls had become bosom friends. So when it says that we are to wage a war, or to prosecute and to proclaim and prosecute an irreconcilable war against his bosom sins, these are those sins that are very close to us. Those sins that are they've almost become our friend. They're an intimate part of us. That is what we are to wage a war against. I'm going to see how my Kindle defines it. Give me 1 second. It just says here, okay, so they focus more on the chest here for their definition. They just focus on the chest. But I think the idea, it's those sins that we hold. Think of it this way. Those sins that are almost like a dear friend, something that we hold close, something that we're intimate with, something that is almost dear to us. Now, we don't sometimes think of sin being dear to us, but we have sins that are very close to us, very much a part of us. And we as a Christian are to wage a war against those sins. All right. And because of that, we have to then have strength and we have to have courage in order to do so. Okay, let's see where he goes with this. There's a lot of directions we can go, but just stay with me and we'll see where he takes this. All right, here we go. So I'm going to read this again. First, the Christian is to proclaim and prosecute an irreconcilable war against his bosom sins. Those sins, now here it kind of gives you an understanding of what this means. Those sins which have lain nearest his heart. So the sin that is closest to your heart, the sin that is dearest to you, the sin that is closest to you. So first I think here, if we're going to proclaim and prosecute an irreconcilable war, we first have to identify what our bosom sins are. What are those sins that lay closest to your heart? Now, this would be a fun group study. Like if small group studies really work the way they were supposed to, right? Which is really about, hey, now you can really be real and we can really get to the bottom of things. Well, this would be a time for people to really honestly identify what their bosom sins are. Now, I think you already know what they are. Look, you have to know. You have to know those sins that lay nearest to your heart. They're dear to you. You have to know. I know we would say, no sin is dear. No sin lies near my heart. No sin. I hate sin. But there's those sins that you're very close with. You've got to identify them. Now, look, if you don't want to say it out loud, that's fine. Because you may be sitting on a bus or sitting at work or in a car with people. Okay, wherever you may be, you may not be able to say it out loud, but you really should write them down so that you can see them. You should really take a pen. Well, I'm not a pencil and paper, and you really should put them down. You should list them. You don't have to say, these are my bosom sins, in case someone finds the paper. You don't have to do that. You can just write down what the sins are. And if someone finds the paper, what is this? Oh, it's just a list of sins that I heard some podcaster talking about. Okay. You can blame me for it. All right. Well, then wouldn't that be a sin of lying? Okay. You can just say, these are some sins. All right. There you go. You don't have to identify whose sins they are, but you definitely should write them down. You really should just look at them and see that, hey, these are your bosom sins. But I wonder if we can, I'm just throwing out an idea here. I wonder if the sin that is closest to us becomes the sin that we try to convince ourselves is not really a sin. I wonder the closest we are to it, if we're, I think it can be true. Like if you are really close friends with someone, sometimes your relationship can blind you maybe to the reality of a situation because they're your friend and you can't see what everyone else is saying about them because your heart is close and connected and with them. I wonder if it's bosom. Do you think the sins that lie nearest to our hearts are the ones we are most intimately aware of, or do you think they become the ones we are least aware of? I don't know. I'm sitting here thinking, I don't know what the reality is. I think there's some sins that are so close to us. We know, without a doubt, we know. And I think there may be others that we blind ourselves to. I think we're quick to see the sins of everyone else. We're so quick to condemn the sins of the world, the sins of other people, sins of people who have some kind of public scandal. But sometimes we're not so good to just say, man, I got some bosom sins. I got some sins near and dear to my heart that I need to be worried about them. All right, this is interesting. Okay, let's just see where else they go here. All right, so first, the Christian is to proclaim and prosecute an irreconcilable war against his bosom sins. Those sins which have lain nearest his heart must now be trampled under his feet. So David, I have kept myself from my iniquity. Now what courage and resolution doth this require? You think Abraham was tried to purpose when called to take his son Isaac, his only son whom he loved, and offer him up with his own hands, and no other yet? What was that to this? Soul, take thy lust, thy only lust, which is the child of thy dearest love, thy Isaac, the sin which has caused most joy and laughter, from which thou hast promised thyself the greatest return of pleasure or profit, as ever thou lookest to see my face with comfort, lay hands on it and offer it up. Pour out the blood of it before me. Run the sacrificing knife of mortification into the very heart of it. And this freely, joyfully, for it is no pleasing sacrifice that is offered with a countenance cast down, and all this now, before thou hast one embrace more from it. Wow, that's some powerful language. As Abraham had to take his son, his only begotten son, his son that was dear and near to his heart, and he was going to have to offer it up as a sacrifice. We've got to take that our Isaac, our sin, that's our Isaac, that is near and dear to our heart, that brings us joy, that brings us the greatest pleasure, that brings us what we feel to be the greatest profit of pleasure. And we need to take it and we need to run the knife, the sacrificing knife, right into its heart before we can take one more embrace from it. And before we can enjoy it one more time, we have to sacrifice it, mortify it. We have to kill it. And I do like the fact that it used the word, the knife of mortification. Keep that in mind, this idea of mortification. We'll talk a little bit more about it. Let's see where else he goes here, all right? He continues, truly, this is a hard chapter. Flesh and blood cannot bear this saying. Our lust will not lie so patiently on the altar as Isaac, or as a lamb that is brought to slaughter, which is dumb, but will roar and shriek, yea, even shake and rend the heart with their hideous outcries. Who is able to express the conflicts, the wrestlings, the convulsions of the spirit the Christian feels before he can bring his heart to this work? Or who can fully set forth the art, the rhetorical insinuations which such a lust will plead with for itself? One, while Satan will extenuate and mince the matter, it is but a little one. O spare it, and thy soul shall live for all that. Another, while he flatters the soul with the secrecy of it, thou mayest keep me and thy credit also. I will not be seen abroad in thy company to shame thee among thy neighbors. Shut me up in the most retired room thou hast in thy heart from the hearing of others. If thou wilt only let me now and then have the wanton embrace of thy thoughts and affections in secret. So in other words, what he's saying is that this bosom sin is going to fight you. It's going to argue. It's going to try to convince you, hey, let me stay. It's going to be okay. No one's going to find out. Come on. Don't do anything. Just don't. It's going to fight you. It's going to strive with you. And you're going to have to be prepared for this battle. If that cannot be granted, then Satan will seem only to desire that the execution may be stayed. All right. Okay. And see here. So I'm not gonna. One of the things we're gonna have to do with this book is we're not gonna always be able to read every single word. So some of these illustrations I may skip here a little bit, and we may come back and look at them in a different context. What he's saying is that Satan and that the sin is going to fight against you, and it's going to make excuse. It may say, "Hey, you can kill me later. Just don't do it right now. Just give me 1 more month. Give me another month. Give me 2 months. Just come on. Just hold off a little bit, just so that it will stick around." And it says, "Well knowing few such reprieve lusts, but at last obtain their full pardon." In other words, if you give it kind of a reprieve, if you give it a reprieve for a month or two, sooner or later it's going to become a full pardon. Sooner or later you're not going to do anything about it. And sooner or later, the bosom sin is just going to remain right there. It says, obtain full pardon, yea, recover their favor with the soul. Now, what resolution doth it require to break through such violence, and notwithstanding all this to do present execution? So what is required for you to get past all of this arguing and fighting and resisting? Here, the valiant sword men of the world have showed themselves mere cowards, who have come out of the fields with victorious banners and then lived, yea, died slaves to a bare lust at home. In other words, some very valiant men in the world who are powerful, who can kill, have taken down number of men in battle, when they come home, they end up dying a slave to bare lust. So what's required here? As one could say of a great Roman captain who, as he rode in his triumphant chariot through Rome, had his eye never off a courtesan that walked along the street. Behold, how this goodly captain that conquered such potent armies is himself conquered by one silly woman. All right. Now, that's not a lot of help. That's not a lot of help here. really, and I know I had to skip around a little bit and skip certain parts, and I apologize for that. But I have to try to pick. I mean, this book is going to take forever to work through, so I've got to choose what parts I want to read and just do my best with that. All right. So feel free to take the copy of the book and read every single word. I just want to make sure you realize when I'm skipping things. Okay. So here's what we need to think about. The book, or at least Gernal here, he does a very good job telling us what we need to be doing, right? We need to proclaim and prosecute an irreconcilable war against his bosom sins. He does a pretty good job explaining how that sin is going to fight against us. And I think he does a very good job of explaining what the bosom sin is, that are a description of bosom sins, those things that lay near to our heart. And he uses a very interesting analogy of Abraham having to offer up Isaac, that we've got to offer up and kill that which is dearest to us, which brings us the greatest pleasure. He did a very good job of articulating how it will fight against us. It's going to say, hey, a stay of execution, just give me a couple of more months. And next thing you know, that turns into a full pardon. Next thing you know, your soul is right back, connected with it again. It also, let's see, what are some of the other things that we'll try to do here? Let me look here. It says, it's going to fight, it's going to roar, it's going to shriek, it's going to shake, it's going to rend the heart with these hideous outcries. It's going to wrestle, it's going to convulse. It's going to do everything it can. It's going to use rhetorical insinuations where it pleads for itself. And Satan will kind of argue that it's but a little one. It's just a little one. It's just a little sin. You can spare it. It's no big deal. Your soul will live for all of that. So it's going to just say, hey, it's no big deal. It's no big deal. It's just a little one. It's going to be okay. Second, it's going to tell you, hey, it can stay a secret. It can stay a secret. And third, it's going to plead for a stay of execution. So the three ways he articulates that this sin is going to fight against you is he's going to try to convince you that it's but a little one. So spare it. It's just a little one. It's not that big a deal. Come on, there's bigger sins out there. Number two, it's going to argue that, hey, you can keep it a secret. No one's ever going to find out. No one's ever going to know. And number three, it's going to plead for a stay of execution. Come on, just wait a little bit. Come on, you can get rid of this a month from now, 3 months from now, 4 months from now. Come on, it's okay. So those are the three ways. Now, here's what he doesn't do. He doesn't really tell us how we engage in this fight, how we can gain victory. It doesn't really tell us the way forward, at least right now. You could argue that later in the book is where we learn how to fight against it, but we're going to at least discuss this a little bit. So let's put this all together here, all right? Let's put this all together. First, I'm going to try to give us some things that we need to do. The first thing we must do is acknowledge what our bosom sin is. We have to acknowledge it. Whatever, or sins plural, whatever those ones that are dearest to your heart, you need to write them down. I've already mentioned that, but I'm going to try to put this together in practical order. We have to acknowledge it. We have to see it. We have to write it down. We have to know which one is close to us. And because if we can't see it, if we can't acknowledge it, there's no hope of defeating it. Right? Second, we have to understand. How can I state this? So number one, we have to acknowledge it. Number two, we have to understand the foolishness of listening to these excuses not to get rid of it. All right? And let's go through these excuses. First, it's just a little one. It's just a little one. Please understand that. The minute we start saying that's a little sin and that's a big sin, oh, that's a serious sin, once we start seeing sin in that kind of category, kind of a mortal, venial side, we're already in trouble. We're already in danger because because who gets to decide which one is the big one? Who gets to decide which one is the small one? Everyone has their list. Everyone tells you this sin will do that. Everyone's got their ideas. You just have to see all sin is rebellion against God. God hates all sin. And you need to see that all sin deserves the eternal judgment of God. And even for the smallest sin, Jesus Christ would have had to die in order to redeem people. All right? Just think, simply partaking of a forbidden fruit brought the whole world into condemnation and damnation. Now, obviously, the reason that partaking of fruit was so bad is it was disobedience to God. But all sin, no matter how small you may think it is, at its core, it's disobedience to God. It's rebellion against God. So it's not that person's rebelling against God by going out on Friday night and getting drunk and engage in sexual immorality. That's really, really bad. But see, I don't go out and get drunk and engage in sexual immorality, so I'm good to go. But that little sin that you're committing is still rebellion against God. God still hates it. So I think the first thing we have to do, we have to acknowledge what our bosom sins are. And two, we have to see the foolishness of these arguments. So the first one, we must not allow ourselves to even listen to the idea that it's a small sin. It's just a small sin. Second, we cannot listen to the argument, or you could put A, B. So number one would be we have to acknowledge what our bosom sins are. We need to write them down. Number two, we have to understand the foolishness of these arguments about to not do anything about it. And then the first one, we wanted to outline, A, we have to realize that no, there are no small sins. All sin is a rebellion against God. B, we have to realize the foolishness of thinking that we can keep it secret, that we can just get away with it, that no one's going to know, no one's going to find out. Look, maybe you get away with it for a year, maybe you get away with it for 2 years. Maybe no one ever finds out. But here's the thing, you don't ever really ultimately get away from it because God knows. That's the main thing we always have to remember. God knows. Now, I know what we may convince you. I made it right with God, so I don't need to tell anyone else. Look, just realize at some point you can't think that way, and you got to deal with it. You've got to deal with it. You can't hope that secrecy allows the bosom sin to continue. All right, you got to get rid of the sin. You got to deal with the sin, and because God knows, and that's the most important thing. You got to do that. And three, you cannot listen to or C, you cannot give it a stay of execution. You cannot let it convince you that just give me a little bit longer. No, you cannot. You have to kill it right then and there. All right. So here we go. Number one, this is very important. Yeah, I'll make sure I understand this. We have to acknowledge what those bosom sins are. You need to write them down. You've got to identify them. Number two, you've got to see the absolute foolishness of all of these excuses to not deal with the bosom sin or sins. You've got to deal with them. And A, listen, you can't go with this idea that it's a small one. B, you can't go with this idea that it's a secret. And three, you can't go with this idea that just give it a little bit more time and then you'll deal with it. You'll deal with it next week. You'll deal with it next month. No, you got to deal with it today. Now, all right. So those are the two major points so far. Number three, we need an understanding of what mortification is. What does it mean to mortify? Remember the language William Grinnell used? He used a very specific language here. He talked about we have to run the sacrificing knife of mortification into the very heart of it. What does that idea of mortification or to mortify? Well, I've got a Bible dictionary here. And it defines mortify this way. All right, I got to find it here. Here's mortify. This is page 859 of the New Illustrated Bible Dictionary. Mortify. King James Version word for the practice of disciplining one's body and physical appetites through self-denial. want you to hear that. Mortify is a word for the practice of disciplining one's body and physical appetites through self-denial. The way we discipline our body's appetites, the way we discipline them, the way we can control them, the way we can mortify them, the way we can kill them is through self-denial. Now, they give a number of scriptures here. They give two. They have Romans 8:13. Let's look at it. Romans 8:13. Romans 8:13. For if you live after the flesh, you shall die. But if you through the Spirit do mortify the deeds of the body, you shall live. All right? That's through the Spirit, mortifying the body, mortifying. This idea, again, the way it's defined, the practice of disciplining one's body and physical appetites. The other scripture they have is Colossians 3:5. Colossians 3:5, where we read this. Colossians 3:5. Mortify therefore your members which are upon the earth, fornication, uncleanliness, inordinate affection, evil concupiscence, and covetousness, which is idolatry. Concupiscence, okay, I said that word incorrectly. Concupiscence, covetousness, which is idolatry. So, in other words, mortify therefore your members which are upon the earth. And these are the things we're to mortify: fornication, uncleanliness, inordinate affection, evil concupiscence, covetousness, which is idolatry. All right, now the dictionary goes on to say this. The New Testament calls believers to be crucified with Christ by mortifying or putting to death such sinful deeds and thoughts as fornication, uncleanliness, passion, evil desire, and covetousness. All right, now, this is very important. So before we move on, let's back up and let's remind ourselves. We are to engage in a war of proclaiming it, prosecuting this war against our bosom sins. The way we're going to do this is, number one, we have to identify. We have to identify what those bosom sins are. I cannot stress that enough. You got to be open and honest. And it may be important to be open and honest with someone else, saying, here are my bosom sins. I'm just going to lay it there. This is where I find the greatest joy, the greatest pleasure. This is a major problem, and it's near and dear to my heart. And I don't want to get rid of it if I'm being honest with you. Just be, look, I don't really, on it, deep down in my heart, I'm right now thinking, I wonder what's going on in the football game. I shouldn't be thinking that, but I am. I'm just going to be honest with you, all right? So that's number one. We got to acknowledge that. Number two, we have to see the foolishness of all of the excuses that are made to get not to take care of the bosom sin right now, all right? Hey, it's just a small one. It's just a small one. You got to, no. It's rebellion against God. Hey, you can keep it a secret. Hey, you can keep it. Hey, come on. You can deal with it. Give it a stay of execution. Wait 2 or 3 months before you deal with it. Wait till summertime. Wait till COVID is over and things get back to normal. Then you can deal with it. No, you got to see the foolishness of that. And then number 3, we have to understand this idea of mortification. We've got to see this. And it appears to me that the idea to mortify, and according to the Bible dictionary, is that we have to discipline our bodies and our physical appetite through self-denial. The way we mortify is through self-denial. Self-denial is what mortification ultimately becomes. And the way we strengthen our bodies to self-denial is we have to practice self-denial in a lot of different ways. And I believe the Bible gives 2 major ways to engage in self-denial that strengthens you so that you can mortify and you can drive the mortifying, sacrificing knife into the heart of your bosom sin. There are 2 ways in which I believe the Bible gives to build up basically this idea of mortification, this idea of self-denial. And can you identify what the 2 things Scripture gives you as, I think, the things that will develop this mortification idea inside of you? Here are the 2. I think the first one, are you ready? Is giving. What do I mean by that? Giving, sacrificial giving. Let's use it that way. Let's state it. Sacrificial giving is the first thing that the Bible really hands you that can help you develop this mortification principle. Because mortification is this, you discipline your body through self-denial. Sacrificial giving is self-denial. I don't have, my wallet is at the end of the table. I don't have my wallet near me. But if I had my wallet, I can open that wallet and see how much money is in it. And if I'm there and I take money out of that wallet to put it over here in the offering plate behind me, to put it in the offering plate, or to give it to a ministry or to give it to someone in need, guess what I have to do? I have to deny myself. I have to give up what I want. I may have to do without. I may have to go without because I gave that to someone else. For example, here's just an example. You're at work. You're starving. You're hungry. But you hear there's someone there who it's time for lunch and they don't have any money. And you look in your wallet, you realize if I give them money, I can't eat. But you're starving. To take that money out of your wallet, to go give it to them, one, demonstrating love for your neighbor. Two, demonstrating you're putting others before yourself, but you're engaging in the act of sacrificial giving. You're giving to someone else in a sacrificial way. You're going to have to go without. You're going to have to deny yourself food. So you're going to go hungry until you get home because you don't have any money. That's sacrificial giving. That teaches self-denial. When you give money to the church, and if you think about it, we see this early on. When we have when we have Adam and Eve, they have sinned, right? In fact, you see this. I just think this is very interesting. You have Adam and Eve, they have sinned. The fall has occurred. Sin has entered into the world, right? And you're like, okay, so what is God, in a sense, going to give them to be able to fight against sin? What is he going to give them to fight against sin? And note is exactly what happens in Genesis chapter 4. So the fall happens in Genesis chapter 3. The punishment is handed down. And then in Genesis chapter 4, we know Adam knew his wife. She conceived and bare Cain and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. She again bare his brother Abel. Abel was a keeper of the sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. And in the process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. Immediately, it seems, a sacrificial system was established. A sacrificial system was established. Now, you could talk a lot of reasons for the sacrificial system. This demonstrated the need of a substitute. This ultimately pointed to Christ. But it also established a principle. You have to sacrifice something of yourself in a sacrificial way. You've got to give something that you want, something that may belong to you, something that may bring you pleasure, something that may bring you satisfaction, and you give it. That giving is mortification. You are disciplining your body through self-denial. Giving. That listen, I know that this is going to sound crazy, but giving, sacrificial giving, like giving an offering for your church, supporting ministry, that sacrificial giving is really a part of spiritual warfare. Sacrificial giving is developing this mortification idea. You're disciplining yourself through self-denial. Giving is something that we're supposed to do as Christians, as a part of a church, on a regular and consistent basis. You're giving to the work of the ministry, but you're really engaging in spiritual warfare because you're mortifying. You're participating in self-denial. Now look, if you've got $100,000 left over at the end of each month, just money that's just laying around $100,000, and you come to church and you give $20, that's not self-denial. Now, I am not saying, listen to me, I am not saying that you should give money in such a way where you cannot pay your bills and you can't feed your children. I'm not saying anything like that, right? You got to listen to what I'm saying. I'm saying that giving is a process that has been established, that is really developing you for spiritual warfare, because mortification is one of the things you have to do is fight against your bosom sins. And the way you fight against it is through mortification. Mortification is this process of disciplining your body through self-denial. You're not going to be able to overcome your bosom sins if you're not strong in self-denial. The way you learn self-denial, number one, is through sacrificial giving. Number two, I think the second thing God has given us to help develop this mortification idea is fasting. Fasting goes at the very heart of self-denial. You can think of the physical appetites that we have, right? This thing that your body needs. And food, we all know what it is to desire food, to be hungry. To deny yourself food when you are hungry, to then force yourself during that time when you would be eating to be praying, to be studying scripture, to be doing a Bible study, to be listening to a sermon, and you go without food. Now, it doesn't mean that, hey, I go without food, and then as soon as that hour is up, then I go get food. No. That means that was your lunchtime. You don't eat until dinner time. You don't, no snack. You go without food that whole time to deny yourself. Self-denial is the root of what mortification is. Again, let me read the definition from the dictionary again. Let me read the definition from the dictionary again. All right? Let me go back to mortify. Mortify. The King James Version word for the practice of disciplining one's body and physical appetites through self-denial. Self-denial is how you discipline your body. Self-denial is how you develop this ability. Without self-denial, you're not going to be able to wage war against your bosom sins, because to kill that bosom sin, you've got to deny yourself that pleasure. You have to deny yourself that thing that brings you such comfort and joy. You've got to get rid of it. You've got to be willing to kill it for God's glory and God's purpose. Well, guess what? Giving to ministry is giving up money that you could use for your own selfish way, for your own thing, for something bigger and better, more than yourself. And the same is true in fasting, because you're giving up that food that would please you, that would take away that hunger pain so that you can feed yourself spiritually. I think that is the two things God has given all Christians. Sacrificial giving, you're told to give, right? You're told to give. We could argue about the tithe or not the tithe. That's irrelevant. You're told to give. As there is a need, you're told to give. Because the ministries don't survive without money. It's just the fact, right? I mean, we don't charge, but I mean, for me to talk on this microphone and to be able to go live on the internet cost us about $100 a month. For us to have our pod pages, each pod page is $15 a month. Okay, to be on SoundCloud is another $15 a month. To have our website is money. All of that requires money. All right, so that's just the way it works. So the fact that ministry requires money, and God tells God's people to support ministry with their money, we can look at it as just a money transaction, but it's a spiritual warfare transaction, because you're learning self-denial. You're giving up something in a sacrificial way, which then you don't get to spend and use on yourself. Fasting is another thing God has given. It's not if you fast, when you fast. When you go without food to engage in spiritual situation, then you're feeding the spirit over the flesh. And that is both of those is a part of spiritual warfare. All right? So let's go through these again. You ready? I was getting ready to say Thomas à Kempis. What William Gurnall has done in this section is he has identified an area that every Christian must be involved in, and that is to fight, to promote and prosecute a war against our bosom sins. He's done a very good job of helping us understand what bosom sins are. Those are those sins that lay near and dear to our hearts, that we love, we find the greatest pleasure and joy from. And he says we've got to take the mortifying sacrificial knife and drive it into the heart of those bosom sins and kill it before we can feel its embrace one more time. But those sins they're going to fight against us. They're going to fight back, and they're going to say, wait. Come on. Just a small little sin. Just a small one. Don't worry about it. Number 2 is going to say, come on, we can keep this a secret. And number 3 is going to give me a stay of execution. Just give me a little bit more time. Now, how are we going to fight against all of this? How are we going to fight against this? Well, number 1, we have to identify what the bosom sins are. We just got to be open, honest, write them down on paper so that we can look at them, and we have to make sure we constantly acknowledge what they are. We have to acknowledge them. Number 2, we've got to see the absolute foolishness of these excuses that are given to keep going. Hey, it's a small one. Hey, it'll stay secret. Give it a stay of execution. We got to see just how foolish those excuses are. And then what we have to do is we have to understand mortification. We got to understand what mortification is, and we got to develop this idea of self-denial, because that's the only way we're going to fight against it. And God has given us 2 ways in which to exercise. Giving, sacrificial giving, because just giving and it's not a sacrifice, that's not accomplishing anything. You're not giving up anything. You're giving up extra. When you got to give up something, you're giving up some money that you could use for yourself. That's when it becomes sacrificial. That's when it becomes painful. And well, that's when really the lesson is being learned. And then fasting. There you have it. All right. I think I'm going to stop right there. Give me 1 second. I'm coming back over and picking up my Kindle. And we read most of this, and then that brings us to number 2. The Christian is to walk singularly, not after the world's guise. All right. So singularity. That's I'm gonna have to work on that word. So the Christian is to walk in a singular way, not after the world's guise. That's the second thing that all Christians have to be engaged in. Okay. I'm just looking. Yeah, we don't have time, obviously, to get into that one. All right. I'm just looking over everything he said about this point. It's what is difficult about the Christian in complete armor is just the way it's worded at times. It's verbiage sometimes. I hate its verbiage because sometimes you can just kind of read over the verbiage, and unless you really stop and think, you can kind of miss the power of the point. Some of the language is beautiful, right? I mean, that language there of, you think Abraham was tried to purpose when called to take his son Isaac, his only son whom he loved, and offer him up with his own hands and no other? Yet what was that to this? Soul, take thy lust, thy only lust, which is the child of thy dearest love, thy Isaac, the sin which has caused most joy and laughter, from which thou hast promised thyself the greatest return of pleasure or profit. As ever thou lookest to see my face with comfort, lay hands upon it, offer it up, pour out the blood of it before me, run the sacrificing knife of mortification into the very heart of it, and this freely, joyfully, for it is no pleasing sacrifice that is offered with a countenance cast down, and all this now before thou hast one embrace more from it. That is beautiful and powerful. But then when he goes and starts talking about how sin will kind of fight, and it's not going to just lay there like Isaac or like a lamb. It's going to shriek. It's going to fight. It's going to give hideous outcries. Then when he starts talking about or who can fully set forth the art, the rhetorical insinuations with which such a lust will plead with for itself. Then you kind of begin to stumble over it a little bit, and then it says, one, while Satan will extenuate and mince the matter, it is but a little one. Oh, spare it. Okay, so you have to kind of stop and go, what is he saying there? He's saying what sin and Satan is going to do is say, hey, this is just a little sin. So you got to really stop and think about it. So sometimes I wish the verbiage was a little different, but I'm trying to read from it, even though at times it doesn't come across as powerfully. Maybe someone who's more proficient in reading this kind of language could probably do so in a more powerful way, but hopefully my teaching on it makes up for the poor reading of it. I hope it does. All right. So there we go. And then that will bring us to the second point. So the first point is we are to engage in a war against our bosom sins. And then second, Christians are to walk basically in a singular way, not after the world's guise. All right. And, we'll look at that next time. Have any thoughts? Email me at newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. Everyone have a great day, great night. God bless.